Let's get started on our second part to creating our Threedle app. So I opened up VS Code again. I'm going to go ahead and open up the live server, which that will open over here. Remember we did last time we kind of set up everything. We downloaded VS Code. We installed our extension for live server. When we right click on the index.html, we can open with live server, which gives us this over here. And of course, if we make updates and autosave is on, that will automatically reflect in our app area. All right. So what we're going to do right now is focus on, we're going to create some inputs. Where we can kind of start thinking about inputting the letters, and when we go into our JavaScript, we'll be able to write some code to be able to check those values and see if they match. So if we think of Threedle, our game based on Wordle, we're going to take a 3-letter word. There's going to be a hidden word, right, that is on the back end of your app, and it's basically the user has to play your game by trying to guess that, like letter by letter, right? So with that being said, let's create an input here. So what we're going to do on a new line, we can add an input value. And if you notice on the left side, it's already tried to put on the screen. So input is just like an input box. So if we do that and we add a closing, this is self-closing. So if we remember from before, when you have an element, it consists of a left arrow, a right arrow, and something in the middle, right? So like H1 in this case is a header, and H1 being the biggest header. There's H2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is an input, right? And so the input, this is its starter, but because it doesn't need an end tag like this, there's nothing in the middle for it, it can self-close. This is a self-closing tag. So we can always change that in the future, but for an input like this, you only need a self-closing tag. All right. So if you go over here and we take a look at it, it gives us a chance to type in stuff. Now, obviously, it doesn't do anything. We haven't set it up to do anything yet. So what we want to do is let's give it an ID. Okay. And so what this is considered an attribute. All right. An attribute. So if you see inside of your opening tag of your element, if you see stuff like space, class, right? This is the class attribute. Down here, I made an ID attribute. And what we want to do with that is let's say word input. Let's call this word input, like this. Okay. What it's going to do is going to give it an ID, like a dog tag, right? Like imagine that your dog has a dog tag on, so you know its name. If it gets lost, somebody knows its name, they find your phone number and get a hold of you. We're kind of going to do the same thing for this, right? In HTML, when we use JavaScript with it, JavaScript's going to call the HTML and say, hey, give me the thing based on this ID, right? And that's how we're going to pull values, check them, and do a lot of the fun logic behind the scenes for our game. But before we do that, let's go ahead and create another button too. All right, and so when you create a button, same thing, element, button, close that opening, see how it automatically creates the closing tag for me. All right, if you look on the left side of the screen, it's actually over here. You can barely see it. It's a super tiny button. It's clickable, but it doesn't do anything. Let's make an ID for that, and we'll call that input button. And if you click in the middle between the two, it's opening and closing elements. The elements, rather, the tags. Open and closing tag of the element button, and type in something. You can put text on the button. So in this case, I'm going to say, submit. Right? Okay. See, we got a submit button over here. Okay. So take note of your two IDs, word input and input button. All right. And so what we're going to do is we're going to open our JavaScript. And the only thing I did right there was that when you click to open a file from your folder over here, you can actually grab these tabs and move them around. So all I did was just slide it over so I can see both of them at the same time. So in this case, I can work with 2 files and not have to worry about anything. So what I want to do with this is I want to use those IDs. I want to get a reference to that input and to that button. Okay, and that's how we're going to make it interactive. So in this case, let's do a const. All right, we're writing JavaScript code now. So what we're going to do is create 2 variables. A variable is like something that holds something else, like a bucket or box, however you want to think about it. And we kind of have to name that. So imagine, like in this case, it's a bucket, and we got to put a label on it. We're going to call this the, let's call it the input field. Okay. That's the name of our variable. So this is const. Const is constant, meaning this is a variable that won't change. Okay. And equals is that we're setting that to something. All right. We're putting something in the bucket. So in this case, we're going to say document. And you can hit tab when you start to type in VS Code. We want that lowercase document and press dot. And you'll start getting a bunch of stuff with it, right? There's lots of stuff here. So document is representing the HTML file in code. And with that, we get lots of functions that we can use. Okay? So if you imagine in one of our other classes, we actually worked on fixing some bugs in a fake vending machine, right? And so the idea is that functions, vending machines are like functions. You put in some money, you press a button, you get something out of it, right? A function is you put something in, it does some work, and you get something out. These, in most cases, these purple squares that we're seeing here, these are all functions. Blue ones being different stuff. But in this case, what I want to type is get element by ID. Okay. And you can actually hit tab here if you see this same thing popping up underneath your text. And we want to do parentheses here. This left parentheses is an open, this right one's a close. Okay, so any cases like this where we're seeing like something left and something right, okay, opening, closing, okay, opening, closing, all right. So get element by ID, but in this case, this is like a vending machine, right? Get element by ID would be like, oh, I want this, I want a Sprite out of the vending machine, right? Well, you got to put something in it to get it. In this case, we need to give it an ID for the input field that we created. And so if you go over here and you look at the input, all right, we gave it an ID of word input. Okay, so if I highlight that and I hit Control C to copy it and click inside the quotes. Okay, click inside of there between the two and paste that. We'll put a semicolon on the end to tell the code we're done with that line. We've added the string that identifies the input that we're looking for in the HTML. So the JavaScript has a reference to that, and we can start taking a look at that in the code. Okay. And this right here, you see where it's orange? There are 2 quotes and something in here. This is called a string. Imagine that you have like, I don't know, at Christmas time, the people liked to, or used to like to put popcorn on string, lines of string, right? Popcorn strings. Think of it as the same way. A string is just a series of letters and numbers and symbols that can be put together, but it starts and ends with a single quote or a double quote. When you see stuff like this, or this over here, these are going to be called strings. Okay? So we have our input field here, and we can go down and add another variable for the button. So we're going to do another const, and we'll say input, we'll call it submit button. I'd like to change the name just a little bit, based on which side we're working on. But we're going to do it the same way. Submit button equals document, get element by ID. We can kind of skip and hit tab. And same way, if we go over here, we take a look at our input button. We can Control C to copy it, Control V to paste it, put our semicolon on the end, and now we have a reference to both of those. All right. Next, let's set up, well, something, when the button is clicked, we want something to happen. So what we have to do is add an event listener for the button when we click it. And what that does is add a function hidden behind the scenes that anytime it sees you clicking on this button, it'll run your code for you. So first, let's take a look at our files over here. So what we need to do is that our index.html has no idea these files exist, right? What we need to do before we start adding any more code to our JavaScript is that we need to tell the index.html where these files are. And so what we need to do is first up top, let's add what's called a link element. We're going to add an attribute called rel, that's a relationship, equals style sheet. Okay. We're going to add type. Let's say text/CSS. And we're going to add an href, which tells us where to look for it. It's going to be this app.css, just like this. If your file's right next to the index.html, you can just call it just like this right here. If we had it in a folder, we might have to dig a little bit, add some slashes, and add it to it. At the end here, just do a self-closing tag. And let's take a look at what we got. So we added a link element, which tells the HTML, hey, we have CSS, a style sheet, a cascading style sheet, as a file over here. Link that to here, so if you see anything in there, you can apply it to our document. For the JavaScript, what we can do is if we go to the body and go to the very bottom, we can add a script tag, or script element rather. And if we do src, which is source, like, hey, what are you looking for? We're going to call that the app.js. And we're going to do just a simple closing tag on that. So that all together, we can keep adding to our JavaScript as well. So what we're working on is adding that event listener to the button. So in order to do that, we're going to take the submit button that we've created and do a dot add event listener. And inside the parentheses, this is a function. Inside the parentheses, we have to say what type of event do we care about. Events are things that you do in the code on your website, web app, stuff like that. You could click, drag, touch. Like on a mobile phone, you might tap or something, you know. We're going to call this click. Okay? And actually, after this, we need to put a comma because it takes two different types of things, right? The first thing is, again, the event type, which is click. The second one is, well, when someone clicks the button, what do you want them to do? And what we're going to do is create a function right after this. We want to call that check input. Okay? So we would do check input. Now we got to have a function called check input. So now what we have to do is we created check input. We have to create that function. So what we're going to do is write function. And whenever we create a function, obviously we're calling it function, but we got to name the function. That's what we kind of did here. That's going to be our function name, check input. We're going to have parentheses, but we're not going to put anything in it, so we can close it. And anytime we're ready to create a code block, we're going to use squiggly brackets. And those squiggly brackets can be found usually right next to your letter P on your keyboard. So we're going to do an open and a close. This one pointing this direction is your open, this is your close. And in here, I'm going to hit enter. And now I have area to write some code inside my function. So remember, a function is like a vending machine. You put something in it here. When you press the button, it's going to go in here, do stuff, and when it's done, it's going to give stuff here. Okay, so we added an event listener on the submit button with a type of click, and when we click it, check input is what we're going to run. So when we run check input, well, what do we want to do? Well, we're developers. We're going to use the dev tools over here. When we're using the dev tools, what we can do is test our code without anybody seeing it. In order to do that, what I'm going to do inside check input, I'm going to type console. See how this is console down here? I'm going to call console from here in the JavaScript. Dot log. And log is a function, so we're going to do open parentheses. And I'm going to name it. Let's say, not name it, this is like a message that will pop up. So I'm going to say, check this value. Something like this. And what I can do after that quote, the end quote there, comma, and let's take our input field, copy, Control C, Control V to paste it. We'll do input field dot value, all lowercase. We'll do the, oops, that's too many. End parentheses on that, put a semicolon at the end. And what we're going to do, every time we click that button, it's going to say in our console, it's going to say check this value, and it's going to grab the value of anything that's in the box here. So let's take a look at that. All right, so when we check it, and when the box is empty, we would expect probably nothing to be in there, right? Take a look at that. Check this value. That's our string right there we created. And then it's blank. Nothing there. Now what if we said, I don't need any of that, thank you. what does it say? Tacos. Tacos. Click it. And there we go. Check this value. Tacos. Isn't that cool? It's because we had a reference to our input field, which was here. And inside that bucket named input field, somebody wrote tacos. I think it was me. And we were able to check that by doing dot value. Value is a property of input field. Input field is, as you can see when you highlight it, it's an element. We did the get element by ID. We have the element here. When we have something in it, in that bucket, we can check what's in it. What's your value? And by putting this here in the console.log function, we're able to print it on the screen to check it out. Pretty cool. So that's about it for this one. Again, most important things that we learned is that, one, after we link our files correctly, we can make IDs for our elements, reference those in the JavaScript by our IDs, add an event listener, which is like a function when something happens, in this case a click. Then we create our own function to do something when someone clicks it. And so that's what we got for now. And I'll see you later on. All right. Thanks again.